Good morning. My name is Wes Rist. I am currently the Director of Education and Research at the American Society of International Law. I was, prior to that, the Assistant Director here at CILE, so I'm very familiar with working with the students at Pitt on accomplishing some of their international career goals. I would wager, I would actually put money down that I'm the only person up here that never actually took a course from Professor Brand. In fact, I graduated and I'm fairly certain he had no clue who I was because the person who was Austin at the time when I applied for the job had to explain who I was to Professor Brand when I applied for the job. That's probably not the ideal way to get the most out of your international experience at Pitt. The reason that was the case in my situation was I spent my second year of law school overseas doing an LLM degree. So I just scarpered off and was like, this is, I'm going to go do this international stuff. This is interesting. The reality was I actually didn't come to law school to do international law. I didn't know I was going to go to law school until like a year before I decided to apply. I was going to be a doctor. That's what I was going to do. My mom was a nurse. I loved the hospital, hung out there as much as I possibly could. The alternative was at the garage at my dad's mechanic shop, and I was like, no, that's no good. I'm not good with machines. So the medical side was what I was going to do. In college, I worked at a hospital, and I loved it. It was wonderful, and I saw interns and residents kill people because they had been awake for 48 hours, and that was the environment of testing new surgeons, and how are you going to know that you can. I was like, I don't want that kind of pressure, so I'm going to find a low-pressure job. Lawyer sounds good, right? The reality was I went to visit a friend, and we had to wait for her to get done with her law school class. She was the first person I had ever met that had gone to law school. I'd never known a lawyer before. And we sat in on her class, and it was constitutional law dealing with criminal procedure issues, and I was hooked. I was like, this is fascinating. Why did no one tell me this existed before? This is what I'm doing. So I went to law school knowing I was going to be a criminal lawyer. I hadn't had a chance to do study abroad in undergrad because I worked the whole way through. So I was like, I'm going to do this international stuff. The ABA just said we can get a full year of credit for studying abroad. I'm going to study abroad and do a criminal justice program, LLM. This will be great. Got over there to do my criminal justice LLM program. 30 out of the 35 of us that had signed up for that program were actually Pakistani peacekeepers who got called up to go do peacekeeping in Pakistan. So the university was like, you can't do the criminal justice program. We're not running it for 5 people. We're sorry. And I was like, I have no idea. What am I've already paid everything. I'm here. I can't, classes were started 2 weeks ago back in the States. What am I supposed to do? And international human rights law actually had international criminal law and European crime courses. And I was like, well, at least I can get a little bit of criminal experience. The year won't be a waste. I'll do this. And a year later, I was done, and I was like, I'm doing international human rights law. What's this criminal stuff? Who cares about that? This is really important. So I came back, took all of the international courses that I possibly could, took seminars that were great, got really good experience, still worked, got good domestic experience. Both, I think, Max and Chuck mentioned, the domestic experience is important. I completely agree. I worked in the criminal appellate practicum that Pitt has that's wonderful with the public defender's office. I did appellate work for a year with them. Terrible stuff. I would never voluntarily do that job, but it's so vital that we have people who can, and you learn so much about what it's actually like to do that kind of work through the appellates and the practicums. Would strongly encourage those kinds of practical skills building elements. Those are really important things as you move on. After I graduated, I had a couple different career paths I was interested in, but I settled on going back to the UK. I had been invited back to work on my doctorate and to teach. So I headed back, and I was teaching classes, and I was writing, and I was presenting papers, and I hated it all. I was like, I'm not actually doing things. I need to be doing things. Writing is not doing things. Ron's like, what are you talking about? But Ron is like the most active law professor you will ever meet. He's the example of what law professors should be in terms of engaging with international law. So I came looking for careers that I could do, things that I could combine the skills that I had, which weren't what I had expected to do. I took the PhD gig because I was going to do international human rights law, and a PhD from Europe was an automatic expert tag. I could be, even though I was young, I could be an expert because I had a PhD, and so I could get into a UN organization or an international organization of some kind, or even a regional one. But that skill set wasn't fully developed. I wasn't going to finish my PhD. I had no interest in getting that doctor tag. Props to Viosa for actually doing that. That's amazing. But it wasn't for me. And again, this goes to the be flexible and be willing to move around, because Eventually, I found the job offer back at Pitt, applied for that, was able to teach as part of that, did a lot of career advising, supervised the LLM students, developed significant program and project management skills, developed budget management skills, developed supervisory skills, things that you don't get in regular law school classes that are essential, absolutely crucial for applying for professional jobs where they expect you to not just actually be a lawyer, but also do other things. I know Katerina and I have talked about this, you know, the management skills that goes into being a lawyer on some of these things where you're actually running a project and you have to do more than just advise about the commercial viability of a piece of foreign legislation. You actually have to figure out, how am I going to staff the office while I'm away advising on this? How am I going to figure out my budget? Can I take an intern? Who's going to supervise the intern? Who's got the time to manage that kind of stuff? Those are skills that are incredibly important. You actually have the capacity to build some of those skills right now while you're a student by doing student government or student organization work. So you can actually engage in some of that even now and be building that kind of stuff. Eventually got to the point where I either needed to transfer over to being a full-time faculty member and kind of going the academic route, or find something else because Ron wasn't retiring fast enough and he wouldn't let me take over the center. So I had to do something else. And Ron was very supportive of that process after I decided to go along that route, and got the job at CILE, where I am in more of a support capacity for international lawyers. So I don't practice international law in the way that Kat Treviosa or any of these others do on a day-to-day basis, although I engage with a lot of these issues. But I create training and educational programs for everyone from high school students to sitting International Court of Justice judges on very, very general topics. You know, what is international law and why should I care about it and should America be involved, to what's the most recent current event topic. You know, South China Sea, China's building artificial islands, how is that going to impact the Convention on the Law of the Sea and sovereignty issues and all of those kinds of things. So there's a wide variety of things that I do there. A lot of what I do also is actually built around professional development for students and new professionals. So that's part of my job at CILE. I'm more than happy to talk with folks about that. I actually came up in the spring and gave a talk that Pitt recorded that you can find on Pitt's YouTube site. That's a very 90-minute detailed kind of how you can build your resume and professional development opportunities. But I'll leave it there because we're short on time. So ask any questions that you want afterwards, and pleasure to talk with you all.